So the blockade, I felt, was likely to pass the threshold of a criminal act. When you have a country that has the control over a border like Israel does over Gaza, allowing hardly any supplies of food or aid to go in, then I think that is a criminal act. Now, a lot of the official bodies like the United Nations and others said the same thing, but Israel doesn't take any of them seriously. So again, I don't know for sure what was happening in that period because I didn't see any independent journalists reporting on it. I do know Palestinian journalists reported on it, and 220 odd have been killed during the conflict. So there's not just a fog of war about this. There's a deliberate suppression by the Israeli government of allowing journalists to do their job, international independent journalists. I think that's to their great discredit.
Patrick Bet-David just asked Piers Morgan the one question every major journalist has been avoiding for 2 years straight. And what happens next is not what anybody in that room expected. Piers does not pick a safe side. He does not give a rehearsed answer. He walks through every single part of this conflict step by step and lands somewhere that will genuinely surprise you. Watch his face carefully as he works through this. This is the moment Piers Morgan stopped being predictable.
October 7 happens. Hamas attacks Israel, and we watch the whole thing, right? And then you do Bassem, and then you host all of these debates, and you're like, wait a minute, what did they do to Palestine? What is it going? So you kind of go from the pendulum, because I personally watch you go like this 3-4 times, because it seems like you're coming from a place that we're like, wait a minute, they're doing that? I'm not with that. Where did you go there, day one, to where are you now? Probably the most reasonable opinion is where you are today, right? Because you've kind of watched it going back and forth. What's your opinion on what happened there?
Well, first of all, October the 7th was one of the most heinous terror attacks of modern times, the worst attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust in World War II. These are undeniable facts. Hamas committed an act that day which immediately established them as a terrorist organization, who therefore renounced any rights to any governmental power at the end of all this. So that all happened on October the 7th with the scale of what they did. 1,200 people killed, nearly 7,000 wounded, 6 people kidnapped. I mean, absolutely despicable, horrific thing. So for many months after that, to the angst of many on the pro-Palestinian side and fury in some cases, I steadfastly defended Israel's right to defend itself. In fact, I said they didn't just have a right to defend themselves, but given that the Hamas official spokesman went on the airways about a week after the October the 7th atrocity to say, we're going to keep doing this again and again, the Israeli government had a duty, not just a right, but a duty to defend its people from further attacks from Hamas.
Stop right here. This is the version of Piers Morgan that millions of people respected in the months after October 7th. He is not hedging. He is not softening his language. He says Israel had a duty, not just a right, to defend its people. That one word changes everything. Duty means inaction would have been a moral failure in his eyes. He held this position for months while people on both sides screamed at him. But here's what makes this clip different from everything else you have seen on this topic. This is only the beginning of his answer. Keep watching.
So, okay, I laid my credentials down. People like Bassem Youssef came on and gave me a very hard time, but I always platform people like him. I platform people on both sides throughout the war.
You always. Yep.
And the bigger the followings they had, the more passionate, the better, because they were the ones getting most of the hearing on the airwaves. And I believe it's my job is to hear all the voices, challenge them all, and let the viewers work out where they think the reality lies. And I continued, and I would still defend Israel's right to defend itself. Right? I mean, Hamas are a terror organization. I've never disputed that at all, and I don't dispute it today. So when people on the really sort of more extremities of the pro-Israeli side, accuse me of being a pro-Hamas guy, well, it's so pathetic. Nothing I've ever said is anything other than they're a disgusting terror group and should have no power after all of this. And they should lay down their arms, and that's going to be the big debate as to whether they do. But then this year, and in particular, several things happened. One was the 3-month blockade, which, I've heard the arguments that there was no starvation, you never saw a starving Palestinian, blah, 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 blah. And one of the inherent problems, actually, with that and with a lot of the IDF blanket denials of things, or we're going to set up an inquiry and investigation when things go wrong. Fog of war, stuff happens. But the Israeli government's persistent, to this day, refusal to allow independent media into Gaza to do their jobs has been a massive problem for their credibility.
Yep.
If you've nothing to hide or worry about in terms of what you're doing, let war correspondents do their job. And as a journalist, I think it's a fundamental principle which they have continued to abrogate in a pretty shameful way, actually. And it does inevitably raise in me, as a journalist, suspicions about what they're hiding, which means they don't want to let journalists in, particularly even since the ceasefire. Still, journalists aren't allowed in by the Israeli government.
This is the moment the entire conversation shifts. The same man who defended Israel more strongly than almost any other major journalist is now asking one of the most uncomfortable questions of this entire conflict. If you have nothing to hide, why block independent journalists from entering? Think about that from a purely logical standpoint. Piers is not making a political argument here. He is making a professional one. And when someone who was this firmly in your corner starts asking why you're hiding something that carries a completely different weight than anything your critics could say.
So the blockade, I felt, was likely to pass the threshold of the criminal act. When you have a country that has the control over a border like Israel does over Gaza, allowing hardly any supplies of food or aid to go in, then I think that is a criminal act. Now, a lot of the official bodies like the United Nations and others said the same thing, but Israel doesn't take any of them seriously. So again, I don't know for sure what was happening in that period because I didn't see any independent journalists reporting on it. I do know Palestinian journalists reported on it, and 220 odd have been killed during the conflict. So there's not just a fog of war about this. There's a deliberate suppression by the Israeli government of allowing journalists to do their job, international independent journalists. I think that's to their great discredit. So I thought the blockade was just crossed every line. Then they undid the blockade, but the bombardment was relentless. And I kept saying to people throughout the war from day one, I don't know what a proportionate response is here. There have been flare-ups in this conflict going back 7 decades. We have never seen anything on the scale of what Hamas did that day. And we've never seen anything on the scale of the response by the Israeli government. They've killed 65, nearly 70,000 people. None of the ones we know about. That's obviously you have to take the figures from the Gaza-run health authority, the Hamas-run health authority Gaza, because there is no other way of establishing it. Historically, those figures have normally proven to be quite accurate, but Israel keeps trying to foggy those numbers, deny them, obfuscate, and so on. To which I say, well, let the journalists in. Let's find the truth. They don't want to do that. So again, that's my big bugbear with this, how you get to the actual truth.
You think it's a genocide or a war?
I don't think it's a genocide simply for one reason. The word genocide gets bandied about a lot. It means the willful, systematic destruction of a people. And I don't think that's what we've seen in Gaza, much as people on the pro-Palestinian side try and get me to say it. No actual declaration of genocide has been waged against any. I mean, even in Rwanda, they never established it as an international court, but it was a genocide. So I didn't know. I learned all this actually covering all this on my show. I had a bunch of genocide experts on. Many think it is a genocide, but many don't think it is. But they all pointed out that actually the bar for reaching genocide is exceptionally high. And, as people have pointed out, there are other flashpoints around the world right now where probably many more people are getting killed. No one cares. No one's putting any spotlight on it. So I think that the rhetoric that's come from people like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir on the Israeli government side, who keep, every time they gob off, and they're very extreme far-right guys, they clearly have had a plan almost from day one of this to turn the events of October the 7th into an opportunity to ethnically cleanse Gaza of Palestinians. And by that I mean just kick them out. And they've now been openly talking about this year. So once I saw that happening, I was like, okay, there are elements of this government who genuinely do want, not just to dismantle Hamas and get the hostages released, they want to kick the Palestinians out of Gaza. They want to annex the West Bank. They said it. You can hear the tapes. And then I hear, well, they don't matter. Their opinions don't matter. They're senior members of the government. So I just felt that was, to me, this guy is an absolute lunatic, as is Smotrich. And I'm sorry, they do matter. They're serious players in this Israeli government. And so they have been waging a rhetorical campaign of wanting ethnic cleansing, which is a crime.
Patrick asks the question the entire world has been arguing about for over a year: genocide or war? And Piers gives the most carefully constructed answer you will hear from any media personality on this topic. He explains the actual legal definition. He separates military decisions from the public statements of specific politicians inside the government. And then he says something that will genuinely stop you in your tracks. He names specific senior government members and says their rhetoric about removing Palestinians amounts to ethnic cleansing, and that ethnic cleansing is a crime. This is not coming from an activist. This is coming from the same man who spent months defending the response to October 7th. That shift matters.
So I don't think it's reached the bar of a genocide simply by comparison to other places where it's not been called a genocide. However, and I do, I've bought the argument that if Israel clearly has nuclear weapons, they don't admit it, but they clearly have them. If they wanted to drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza, they could have done. I understand if you're waging a deliberate genocide of a whole populace, you could do that. I get that argument, okay? But I do think they've got to be more accountable for what these guys on the government have been saying, because what they're talking about is ethnic cleansing. Now, to Trump's great credit, I think, for this alone, he should get the Nobel Peace Prize. Never mind anything else. He got hostages released, but he also made it clear to Netanyahu, you are not going to annex the West Bank, and I want the Palestinian people to come back to Gaza, and we're going to rebuild this with a coalition of people helping to rebuild it and trying once and for all get this situation sorted in a way that we had with Northern Ireland, for example, near my country, where after decades and decades of conflict between warring neighbors, in the end, when nobody thought it could happen, in the late 90s, Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, Senator Mitchell got together and they managed to barrel through a peace plan that has pretty well held steady ever since, and the killing stopped on both sides. This can be done. It's incredibly difficult, but I am delighted that Donald Trump, in my opinion, has barreled through some common sense into Netanyahu, who was being fueled by these guys.
And here's the twist that changes everything. After everything Piers just walked through, after all the criticism, all the difficult questions, he ends in a place that nobody who started watching this video expected him to land. That is the journey of this answer. It started at October 7th with one of the clearest and strongest defenses of Israel's right to respond that any major journalist gave in those early months. It moved through months of honest observation, uncomfortable questions, and careful thinking. And it ended somewhere far more complicated and far more honest than where it began. What you just watched is one of the rarest things in media today. A man who did not just repeat what his audience wanted to hear. A man who kept watching, kept listening, and kept updating his position as the facts on the ground kept changing. You can agree with every single word he said. You can disagree with every single word he said. But you cannot say he was not paying attention. That is what real journalism is supposed to look like. Drop your opinion in the comments right now. Did Piers Morgan get this right, or did he go too far? And if this conversation made you think, share it with one person who needs to watch it today.